Greetings, Grey Hunters, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
I think it's time that we finish off the trifecta of 3rd edition Space Marine supplements.
The ferocious warriors of the Space Wolves are famous throughout the Imperium for their bravery and willingness to fight, no matter the odds.
The 3rd edition version of Codex Space Wolves was released in the year 2000 and was written by Jervis Johnson, Andy Chambers and Gav Thorpe, with lovely cover art once again from David Gallagher. I've always wondered what exactly this Marine is shooting at, considering the Orcs are all coming at him from this direction. Also, it's taken me 2 decades to notice that there's actually a second Marine in the picture. Let us know if you've never noticed him either, or if we're just really unobservant. And I've got to mention how both the Space Wolf and the Orcs are slightly different in coloration than how they're usually painted. Okay, I'm done pointing out little things about this cover now, I'm sorry. As with the previously covered 3rd edition Angel codices of both the Blood and Dark varieties, this one required owning the base Space Marine Codex in order to use, since it only contained the units unique to the wolf-themed Space Vikings that we know and love.
And what were those units, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you did, because otherwise this would have been a much shorter video. For HQ units, they had Wolf Lords, Wolfguard Battle Leaders, Rune Priests, and Wolf Priests, all of which could be accompanied by a squad of Wolfguard bodyguards, and most could be accompanied by some Fenrisian wolves, which was the only way Fenrisian wolves could be taken at all in this codex. It's also here that we saw the first real oddity of this codex. When using it, Space Wolves ignored the usual HQ requirements of a scenario and instead had to take 1 HQ choice for every 750 points you took, rounding up. So in a 2000 point game you had to take exactly 3, no more, no less. For reference, the standard force organisational chart that you'd usually see required a minimum of 1 and allowed a maximum of 2 HQ choices. Rune Priests, being the Space Wolf version of a librarian, had their own unique psychic power called Stormcaller. The power allowed the Rune Priest to call up a blizzard to create a cover save for a unit within 12 inches of him. It's also probably called that since Niall was not playable in this book, so they wanted to sneak in a reference to him there.
For Elite's choices, you had Dreadnoughts, Wolf Scouts, who had changed from young wolves to old veterans since the last codex, and Iron Priests. Iron Priests that could be accompanied by power weapon wielding thralls. The fact that they were their own unit at all is notable since in the regular Space Marine Codex, their equivalent Tech Marines could only be taken as part of a command squad. There were also the Wolfguard who, like now, were simply veteran Marines who could be used in different roles. Here they could be used either as leaders for other squads, or as the aforementioned bodyguards. However, you could only take a maximum of 20 of them across your whole army regardless of its size, and they counted as 1 elite slot filled regardless of whether you used 1 or the full 20. Which meant you couldn't really do any kind of Wolfguard based armies, but then again 3rd edition wasn't really the edition for that kind of thing anyway. Compared to modern editions of the game, or even 2nd for that matter, 3rd edition was pretty restrictive with what you could take most of the time.
Honestly, the ability to just single out a unit and just go, yeah, that's the one, that's the model I'm going to base my entire army around, is one of the things we genuinely love about the modern game. Hence why 90% of my Space Wolf army is Dreadnoughts. And speaking of Dreads, there's a unit we've still not talked about yet. Venerable Dreadnoughts, another thing the regular Space Marine Codex didn't have yet, could be taken as either an elite or an HQ choice, making them effectively a store-brand version of Bjorn the Fell-Handed, who, like Niall, didn't get rules in here for some reason, despite being in the previous codex. Although on the bright side, Venerable Dreads did allow you to re-roll the dice when you would roll to see who went first, which is a neat trick. The troops' choices were simply Grey Hunters, which you always had to take at least 1 unit of, and Bloodclaws. Fast attack was Bloodclaw Bikers and attack bikes along with the land speeder variants from the main book. The Bloodclaw Bikers could be outfitted as jump pack troops instead if you liked, though sadly they couldn't take the bikes and the jump packs at the same time, so no doing wheelies as you deep striked. Cowards. Rhinos and Razorbacks were available as transports, but given that we're dealing with a Space Marine faction, you probably assumed that already, being so smart and good looking.
Heavy support was more or less the same as regular Marines, except instead of Devastators they had their Long Fangs instead, which were just better, albeit more expensive, Devastators anyway. And finally, they could take a single Leman Russ Exterminator, that's the variant with twin autocannons. It cost more than the Imperial Guard version at the time, but it benefited from the improved ballistic skill of Marines. Plus, it's just nice to actually have a Leman Russ in the army whose Primarch the tank takes its name from. And if you're wondering, the name is pretty much the only reason they give in-universe for them having them anyway. They just like to keep a few around to honour their Primarch. These units had their own army-wide special rules as well as the regular ones that applied to Space Marine armies. No matter the odds meant Space Wolves ignored negative modifiers to their leadership due to being outnumbered in close combat. Counterattack meant that when they were charged, they would just charge the charger right back, and True Grit, a rule that many units had, let them wield a bolter and close combat weapon as if the bolter was a pistol, and so gaining +1 attack. Although the downside was that they couldn't benefit from the +1 attack they'd usually get when charging due to the unwieldiness of the whole arrangement. Blood Feud was another army-wide special rule that meant Space Wolf units would hit any Dark Angel or Thousand Suns on a 3+ in melee regardless of their weapon skill, something the Dark Angels and Thousand Suns could also do right back. Although it is kind of funny that this rule puts their rivalry with the Dark Angels on an equal footing with their burning hatred of the Thousand Suns, a faction that has, may I remind you, literally invaded their homeworld. Okay, admittedly the Space Wolves did it to them first, so I guess fair's fair.
The final rule we want to mention is will not teleport.
Space Wolves have little trust or respect for the more arcane aspects of the technology used by the Imperium. In particular, they dislike the idea of teleporting into battle and remain stubbornly opposed to its use.
Meaning that units in Terminator armor couldn't teleport, and I mean, they would be teleporting through the warp. I probably wouldn't want to do it either. It sounds bloody awful. This was actually a Space Wolf thing for a while, and I honestly kind of miss it from their current incarnation. Sure, it's a restriction, but it's a restriction that adds a lot of flavour, you know?
As we've alluded to earlier, this book was a little light on special characters, with characters who were present before and after this edition, like Bjorn, missing. The only ones present were Ragnar Blackmane, Ulrich the Slayer, and Logan Grimnar, who could only be used in an army of 2,000 points or greater, although we are sad to report that Ragnar has already lost his 2nd edition blonde topknot. However, there was a really fun little thing between these 3 characters. So, because Ulrich had been involved in the training of so many Marines, and he was very good at his job, if you took Ulrich you could pick one other model in your army and increase their weapon skill by 1, representing that they were one of the Marines that Ulrich trained. But that model can't be Logan or Ragnar, as it's established that Ulrich mentored them both, so they already have that bonus applied to their stats. I don't know, it's nice to just see the fluff and crunch intermingling like that. Plus it means they're all pretty dangerous to come up against in close combat. In 3rd, weapon skill 6 wasn't a thing you saw on Marines very often. Oh, and for those that started playing the game more recently, in this context, weapon skill 6 doesn't mean they hit on a 6, because back then the way it worked was that you compared your weapon skill to your opponent's weapon skill, and that's how you got your to-hit roll. There was a handy chart. It's less complicated than it looks.
They also had a host of unique war gear, only 5 of which had the word wolf in the name. Okay, 6 if you count the term wolfen, but it's spelled differently so it doesn't count. Several, like runic armor or the Wolf Helm of Russ, were functionally identical to things regular Marines had, but some were more unique. Frostblades and Frost Axes, for example, were power weapons that added +1 to your strength, and a Chooser of the Slain was a mechanical flying creature a Rune Priest could take that counted as an additional close combat weapon, and could prevent infiltrating units from infiltrating. It was likely included should anyone want to get use out of the old model for our Nigel. Although our favourite items may be the healing potions and balms, which a Wolf Priest could use to negate 1 failed saving throw per turn on any unit he joins. It's not our favourite because of what it does, but because having a literal healing potion is such a fantasy concept that it's just kind of fun that it shows up in here. In fairness, the Why Collect a Space Wolves army section at the start of the book does straight up say that the Space Wolves are very much a fantasy army that happens to inhabit the Imperium, so I guess it checks out. Now let's have a bit of a run through of the fiction in here. The first big chunk of it was on page 3 and was actually an excerpt from William King's novel, Space Wolf, which describes Ragnar Blackmane in the middle of a battle, and considering Ragnar is the protagonist of that book, that's not wholly surprising. The next big chunk covered a prospective Marine undergoing the test of Morkai. You know, the thing where aspirants are implanted with the Canis helix dropped off several miles from the fortress monastery naked and told to find their own way back. Something that, given the fact that everything on Fenris wants you dead, would be difficult even if you were allowed trousers. The aspirant in question here was called Hakon. He ate an elk. No idea if that was supposed to be the same Hakon that showed up as a Wolfguard in a story from the 2nd edition Codex, but we're going to say that he is, because the continuity pleases us. And if he was, then he got there the long way round, as he showed up again later in this book as a Longfang, in a tale we like to call Storytime with Uncle Hakon. In it, he'd been assigned to a rogue trader fleet along with several other marines of different chapters, who were all telling stories about their homeworlds to get to know each other better. Hakon, of course, tells them all about how Fenris is awful, and when the landscape isn't killing them, the population spends most of their time trying to kill one another, but that makes them strong, so it's technically a good thing. And all I can think about is the rogue trader sitting in the corner going, "All of your homeworlds are terrible, why are you bragging about this?"
The last few bits we want to talk about were all written from an in-universe perspective. This one talked about Ragnar Blackmane's rise to Wolflord, noting that the deed that elevated him to Wolfguard, killing an orc war boss and his bodyguard single-handedly, is almost certainly exaggerated. A nice reminder that a lot of the in-universe fiction can also be in-universe propaganda, so it's basically up to you how much of it you want to believe. Then there's the report by a Ministorum envoy who was sent to check out the cults of different Space Marine chapters, but was told to piss off when he approached Fenris. This led to him pretty much basing his entire report on what some bloke down the pub told him. The envoy is actually the same guy, Balthazar van Heppel, who was looking into marine rituals we mentioned back in our 3rd edition Space Marine Codex video, and likewise Inquisitor Bastelec Grimm shows up again too, this time writing a breakdown of how these Space Wolves are structured in response to Heppel's report. It mentioned that the fact that Space Wolf Scouts are veterans rather than new Space Marines like other chapters has caused some confusion with Imperial archivists in the past. Which sounds like they're referencing that in the last Space Wolf Codex, Space Wolf Scouts were trainee Marines just like any other chapter. So you could read it as them saying that this retcon was actually just the result of poor Imperial record keeping. I don't know, it's just a fun way to do it. Reminds us of the similar thing they did when they changed the origin of Gene Stealers.
Also, we weren't really sure where to put this part in the video, but under this lovely piece of Bran Redmore art, they've actually typoed his name, so he is now Bran Redmo. Moving on to the colour section of the book, it shows off a few quirks of the time. For one, the heavily ornamented Space Wolves plastic kit didn't exist yet, there was just an upgrade sprue to modify vanilla Space Marine units. So the plastic Marines look relatively plain compared to their modern equivalents. There's also the old Wolf Scout models that look distinctly different even from the ones regular Marines had at the time, along with all the fun of seeing a Leman Russ in Space Wolf colours. Plus, it's nice to see this version of Logan Grimnar next to the old Terminator models, so you can see that there was a time when this model of the old Wolf wasn't dwarfed by his brothers. Although we're less of a fan of it reminding us of when devastated weapons were metal, but their bodies weren't. It was always a fun time placing those on an uneven surface.
Then there's the bases, which still feature the goblin green rim of earlier editions, but with a top that was a different colour entirely, being a grey gravelly effect. This combination of classic green rim colour with an incongruous top is something that appears a lot on studio models that were painted from mid to late 3rd edition, with a few holding into early 4th. After that, most of them took on the brown rims that you see on studio models to this day. I know examples like this can be found before and after, but when I see a model like this, it just screams 2000 to 2004 at me, a part of the transition between the old bases and the new. I really did write an entire paragraph about the trends in base rimming. I think I figured out why we don't have more subscribers. Oh, and although this isn't technically part of the colour section, it's just on the inside of the cover, Anthony Warrington's Golden Demon entry fascinates me. Like, it's incredibly well done, but I cannot get the mental image of a Space Marine with this face out of my head. It appears to be the head from a 1991 Empire Flagellant, if you're wondering. He's beautiful. I love him.
So, all in all, this isn't a bad little codex for one of these smaller supplemental ones. Maybe we're a little biased, since we both like the faction a lot anyway, but we came away enjoying talking about it a lot more than the other two Space Marine ones we've covered for whatever reason. This also means we've now covered not only the main 3rd edition Space Marine Codex, but all the other codices that required its use too, so go us, I guess. Although, the main takeaway from this is that Space Wolves should be allowed to take Leman Russ tanks again.
And they shouldn't be allowed to teleport, because we liked it. And that matters, apparently. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please consider throwing us a like or subscribing if you haven't already, since we do videos like this every month. If you've got a few quid spare and would like to help us produce said videos and get your name in the end credits, then patreon.com/snipeandwib might be able to help you solve that problem. Also, thanks to HobbySquig for contributing their voice to this episode, and thanks to Hans the Dragon for coincidentally sending us the Viking rune pendants that we're wearing. They got here like a few days before we recorded those parts, so serendipity. With all that said, thank you very much for watching. This episode was mostly made during a heatwave here in the UK, and our houses are really not built for it, so I'm gonna go stick my head in the fridge. Okay, bye!